We're live. I'm going to start off this episode by saying we do have a Lord of the Rings expert here on, Will Anselm, and I'm going to introduce him in a second. But first, if you got the title of this podcast, we're going to be diving into the eye that consumes, Sauron's eye. And we're going to be talking a lot about Sauron, a lot about Lord of the Rings. We're definitely going to weave in concepts of porn recovery into it, of course. But I think this will be an extra treat for you if you are big into Lord of the Rings like I am. Because I think Will's going to even teach me a lot of stuff as we go, brush up on some Middle-earth history. So before I introduce Will, I just want to start with just a little bit of an intro here to set the tone for the podcast.
So Sauron, he didn't begin as a monster. He began as something good. A being who loved order, structure, things working the way they were meant to. But somewhere along the way, that desire was twisted. Order became control became domination, and instead of letting that go, he fed it. He learned from darkness, he sharpened it, he leaned into it. And when he returned, he didn't look terrifying, he actually looked good, trustworthy, convincing. That's how deception moves. He built the One Ring, a reflection of himself. His will concentrated. And the more of himself he poured into it, the less of himself he remained. Until eventually there was no man left. No body, no relationship, no ability to create, to love, to connect. Just an eye, watching, searching, consuming, always looking, never quite satisfied. And that's where it hits close. This is why we're talking about this today, because I think the same drift is real, can be real in our lives. When we stop living, when we start watching, we start becoming the voyeur of life. We trade our presence for consumption. The connection starts to fade. Appetite grows, and over time, something in you just thins out. Less grounded, less present, less alive, until all that left is a gaze. And you don't feel like yourself anymore. You're just watching.
So that's a little bit of an intro what we're talking about today. Like I was saying at the beginning, I'm joined by a friend of mine, Will. He's joining us. It's almost midnight across the pond. So I want to first give you a shout out for just being on late. I know I just got off work and you're like getting ready to go to bed. So appreciate you being on. Will was actually on episode 58 of this podcast, which was pretty recent, The Art of Beholding Beauty in a Culture That Consumes It. So a little bit of a play off of this. We were talking offline and Will brought up the idea of, what's in Sauron's search history? So I think it'll be an interesting one. But Will's also a medieval art historian. He's the author of the Palinode Substack. You're the host of the Catholic X Spaces on X, which is, some people still call it Twitter. And I'd call you a Tolkien scholar from across the pond. So Will Anselm, thanks for being on today, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's a treat. It's nice to be back. It's last time was great. It's always great talking to you, Mac. It really is.
Yeah, and I think Will, Will, you sent me something earlier. I think you posted this on Substack actually, and maybe on X as well, I think. But I think you shared a letter that Christopher Tolkien wrote about.
Yeah, I did. I just came across this lost letter written by Christopher, written by Tolkien to his son Christopher in Tolkien to his son in 1945, and it addresses this particular issue. It's kind of revolutionary because it was lost, and I literally just found it today. My dearest Christopher, thank you for your letter of the 27th. I'm sorry to hear that the weather in South Africa continues to be oppressive. Here it's been grey and drizzling, which suits my mood admirably. But I have been wrestling all week with the particular fact in The Lord of the Rings of Gandalf's first entry into Dol Guldur, and find myself unable to proceed with addressing a matter of some delicacy. You will recall that I mentioned the necromancer, who is of course Sauron in disguise, had established himself in a fortress in southern Mirkwood. But the question is, what? The question that has detained me is, what exactly did Gandalf find there? Not merely a shadow of nameless treasures, the published text has said. I'm afraid the truth is more sordid than that, and the plain fact is that Gandalf discovered Sauron's hard drive. And I do not mean a collection of storage components or facilities. That would have been quite manageable. But he contained and discovered things meticulously catalogued of unwholesome character. When Luthien, later elsewhere I have been reflecting upon, when Luthien Tinuviel danced before Morgoth's throne, she would, as the kids say, understood the assignment. Morgoth the Defiler, the tyrant of Autumno, had reigned in darkness unvested since before the count of time. Luthien, however, had him comatose on the flagstones of Angband in a puddle of his own drool in 30 seconds. And Tolkien calls this the greatest deed of all time. True. But it was also the first time a man had been destroyed by his own search history, though it would not be the last, alas. Ever yours affectionately, your father, John Tolkien. P.S. Don't show this letter to your mother.
What an ending to a letter.
That could have been better. By the way, guys, I found that letter in 15 minutes between coming out of a Twitter space and sitting down here. So it could have been better with a bit more time. But
so I think that sets the stage really well, and maybe for the audience too. I know that we just mentioned Morgoth, and I think throughout this podcast, as we're listening, we're going to jump back and forth, I think, between Recovery, between speaking about Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth, all of that history. But part of it, I think, is telling the story of Sauron, because I think that's going to help us, as we're going through this podcast, as we're listening and talking, understand that it's not like Sauron started as his eye. Like, that's how Sauron came into being. He actually came into being a different way and was corrupted and turned into something else, right? Basically an ever-watching eye at the end of the day, before the Ring of Power is destroyed, right? And I think a good starting point for this would be, let's talk a little bit about Morgoth first, right? Because before Sauron became Sauron, there was Morgoth. So what you were saying, maybe explain a little bit behind that with Luthien dancing in front of Morgoth. Like, how did that come to be?
Yeah, well, I mean, even before that, just to gloss Morgoth, I don't know if people caught my most recent article in response to Jack Postbeck, which was actually an article adapted from the transcript of Alive in response to his remarks that Tolkien is the world of the Lord of the Rings is fundamentally pagan. It was just 90 minutes on the Aina Lindale, and people who aren't familiar, we're not going to. The whole discussion isn't going to be contingent on whether you're a Tolkien nerd or not, though do come in if you are. Melkor is essentially the devil, the first person to introduce chaos and disorder and into the universe. At the beginning of creation, very near the beginning of creation, of the creation of Ea, the world that is. That's the name for the universe in Tolkien. And he plagues. I mean, he destroys and blights the deathless, the Valar, the angelic spirits who oversee the world on behalf of the Creator, or in collaboration, or in pursuit of the desires and ends of the Creator, Eru Ilúvatar. And it goes on for a long time. They do something good, he destroys it. They do something good, he falls in with a bad crowd with a giant spider demon, and then destroys it. Yeah, Ungoliant. And then ultimately time passes, and he is sort of a well-established tyrant, and Sauron is an angelic spirit of a lesser order who is corrupted into Melkor, later known as Morgoth's service. And in the middle of the Silmarillion, the tale that was closest to Tolkien's heart is the tale of Beren and Luthien. And Luthien is described as the most, in very explicit terms, and this is one of the reasons where was our jumping off points, she is the most beautiful creature ever to have existed in the universe, in all of Ea, in Arda certainly. High praise, and only to be, the only person who's come close is Arwen Undomniel, who later becomes a daughter of Elrond, who it is said of her that when people look upon her, it's as if the likeness of fair Tinuviel, the nightingale, has returned once again into the world. But through a series of quests, Luthien and an ancestor of Aragorn's, find themselves hunting after these primordial jewels that have been stolen by Morgoth, the devil, right? And they enter the very bowels of his fortress of Angband. And Morgoth lusts after her. And this is Tolkien doesn't really write too much about sex explicitly. This is painfully explicit because in all the drafts of Tolkien's story, right from what he was writing in the trenches, this point about this dark lust and hunger in the mind of Morgoth or Sauron in certain circumstances doesn't go and doesn't disappear. I want to read, get it precise. I just lost my thingamajig. I have for quotes. I do know most of these by heart, but for the sake of okay. Then this is from Beren and Luthien, from the Silmarillion. Then Morgoth, looking upon the beauty of Luthien, conceived in his thought an evil lust, and a design more dark than any that had yet come into his heart, since he fled from Valinor. Just to emphasize that, just quickly, more dark than since he fled from Valinor. In this time, he has spread darkness across the earth. He has bred millions of orcs by disgusting and unknown means, probably involving rape of men, according to some accounts. It is the most dark design that came into his heart, it says, since he fled from Valinor when he destroyed the two trees. And it says, thus he was beguiled by his own malice, for he watched her dancing, believing her free, leaving her free for a while, and taking secret pleasure in his thought. So just to introduce people coming in to listen, when I said, Morgoth's a bit of a gooner, this is where we started.
Yeah, this is a launching point. And I think that's a really interesting, dynamic too, obviously. Speaking of Luthien as being like the most beautiful creation in the universe, basically, and that you have the devil basically that sees that as an object, something to defile, something to I guess corrupt. And I think that's in a way what lust is, when I think about it, and relating this to the porn-free millennial theme, is we want to consume that beauty as like an object, rather than receive it, with both sides consenting to that, whatever that is. And instead, you see this character Morgoth who corrupts Sauron, because Morgoth's ultimately Melkor is like the ultimate like baddie in Lord of the Rings, right? I think with the movies and stuff, we kind of think about Sauron a lot, but Melkor is really like the creator of that. And I think that's a good launching point, like for like talking about the introduction of Melkor a little bit, and then we want to get into Sauron too. I think we want to know what's in Sauron's search tree, right? We're both investigators, so we're gonna get there, but we just got to build up the story first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how in the Silmarillion, it's so Morgoth is ultimately, well, I mean, that is the defeat of Morgoth is one of the main results of the conclusion of the Silmarillion, and it's kind of very difficult. It's not very difficult to talk about, but it's interesting because remember the Silmarillion wasn't finished. But for the purposes of our conversation right now, that doesn't matter. In that there is a great battle at the end. The War of Wrath, and Rendell soaring through the skies in Vingalot, his boat, which has been hallowed by the Valar, with the Silmaril on his brow, and in Caligon's slain, and Morgoth is cast down, and has his legs hewn out from under him, and he attempts to treat for mercy when he's waged this war, and eventually, the Valar descended. All of that stuff is going on. It's interesting, but Sauron is kind of just introduced. He's sort of, and he is a lieutenant of Sauron's originally, And it's interesting that one of the earliest mentions of references to Sauron in the Lord of the Rings in very early, before the flight to the Ford or anything like this, before they've left the Shire, there is the mention by Gandalf. Gandalf says, "Remember," or is it him? I think it's him. No, it's Aragorn. Aragorn says when they're at Weathertop, it was, the great Tower of Amon Sur was erected, and it was built in the days of Baron Camlus, my foresire, in the days of war between men, elves, and the great enemy, a greater enemy of whom Sauron was but a servant.
Mm.
And so, in the eyes of mind of the world today, there isn't much to go on in terms of giving him a redemption arc, but Amazon have trying their best with the Rings of Power at the moment to,
Oh
you
boy.
know, he had a childhood or whatever. But no, he's introduced, and the first time that we really see a great deal of Sauron in the world in the Legendarium is in the story the story of Baron Luthien, when he is also exposed as a bit of a gooner as well. Why he is even, it goes even deeper. But are we in the right direction? Sorry, I'm slightly need to reset
Oh,
myself.
we're in a good direction. So that's kind of interesting too, is that Sauron's there witnessing it as well, right? So you have, in some ways, right? I guess when I think about porn and its effect, right? It starts somewhere with somebody. And typically in my life, in my experience, it has started with somebody like showing you it, like a friend. Like, or some people do have stories like where they just kind of stumble upon it, right? Like they find I think in the old days, it's like you find like a magazine in a field, or it's just kind of everyone's porn origin story to me is very fascinating because they're all like just a little bit different in how it comes up in somebody's life. Sometimes it's just like an accidental thing. Like you find it like just in the trash or something, you just see it, or you're like in a store. But I mean, for me, it was like introduced to me like from a good friend, right? When I was a kid. So it's interesting with Sauron in a way. I'm sure he saw a lot of other things, but to witness that to where it's like the most beautiful being in the world that's like captured and to like lust after that, I think that's like a very powerful concept to think about.
It goes back to what we were saying previously about the consumption of beauty, and actually participating in beauty and appreciating it rather than attempting to consume it and thereby, using it up. And this is, I would argue, when I led the most recent Silmarillion read through that I was hosting with friends over on X. We read through the whole thing, as you know, with commentary. I've repeated something that I've said before, which is that, the central concern, there's almost every dimension of the narrative and of the Lord of the Rings, the main narrative and even tangential narratives, ultimately comes back to a, one or two issues, or one or two places, or one or two people. And you think of the creation of the Silmarils and the sundering of the elves. And, this Christopher Tolkien says very plainly, the purpose of the elves is art. It's the contemplation of beauty. It's techne, bringing things that have been created according to the sub-creative principle, as Tolkien would put it, to perfection, to give glory to their creator. And the delight is in the craft and in the appreciation of the thing been made well, but not in the thing itself.
Mm.
And the reason why it's called the Silmarillion, you could argue, is why it's this war over these gems, is because that is a decisive moment under the influence of Morgoth, when the appreciation of beauty becomes distorted for Fëanor. When you think that, Melkor it's under Melkor that the Noldor are instructed and then rise to the highest levels of craftsmanship and knowledge about gems and what we would basically call like physics, or sort of like, I don't know, hidden mysteries in the world, in today's language. And all of a sudden, the contemplation of beauty and participating under the subcreative principle is no longer enough. And then this bloody war gets
Mm.
fought over who has these beautiful, important objects in their possession. So that's how the elves are corrupted. And there are several of the Maiar, several of it, for example, including Sauron, but also Saruman, both of whom were smiths, both of whom were subordinates of Aule, the smith,
Mm.
originally. Consider Aule the smith. It all goes back to crafting. And
Mm.
both Sauron and Saruman are corrupted. Sauron by Melkor and Saruman by Sauron. The theme here all the way through is how are we to make things and do things and look at beautiful things without being reductive, but beauty, aesthetics, prudence, humility. That's the central concern. Making things and how are we to make and do things is kind of the question that if there were a philosopher in the world of Lord of the Rings at some Hobbit university, I don't know, like Bree State U, they'd be asking the question. There'd be
E, you know,
Bucklebury College, Bucklebury College, right?
yeah.
Yeah, you'd be asking the question. This is how do we learn from our past? Well, it's quite clear we don't know how to look at beautiful things.
So good. And that weaves into the discussion, right? The theme is is in my mind, right? I think porn is like a corruption of that beauty, right? It's a twisting of it. It's a twisting of it more for consumption to be, and I think, in my opinion, it consumes you, right? So when we think about like the Ring of Power, that's kind of what I was talking about while you were getting reconnected a little bit. Was this the concept of the ring when it comes into the hands of man, hobbits, elves, all that stuff? It seeks to invite you in, to pull you in with its power,
Yes.
with its the allure of it. Uh, but at the end of the day, it's looking to consume you so that you become more of a servant to it than it being a servant to you.
Yes. Yes. And that's in the broader sense. That is, there's a lot of weird things that people say or try to make out of. I've heard in my wayward years. I've heard quite a few talks on Sunday from youth pastors who've said, and that, what else that reminds me of? The Lord of the Rings. It's just like, and there are good things that you can do with that, and there are also you need to get a grip things that people can say, but it said Gandalf says this very clearly. It is a very clear depiction of what sin looks like, and he says, well, he would take it from a desire to do good, and and there are other statements about this subsequently, and I think in the Fellowship, Gandalf says, it would give him what looked like life. It would extend his life, die, but he would be used up and used up and used up, consumed until he would know nothing but weariness, and eventually would just pass. Would be no better than a wraith or a ghost. And let's not say that that's Tolkien saying what sin is or what. We're not making it specific, but that just as we read and reflect, certainly as whether not just for guys, but any sensible person, let alone Christians who read that, will resonate with that statement in a very profound way. It doesn't matter. I don't think we need to say that Tolkien's saying this about sin here. I don't buy that. But for us as readers, you can't not read that and resonate with that description, thinking about some of the problems and issues and vices that we have or had or might in the future struggle with, or have seen others struggle with as well.
Yeah, well said. Because I think part of it, right, is when you talk about, you can use the word addiction, or you can use the word like a vice, or whatever that thing is that like calls to you in your life, or what has called to you in your life. I think it does disguise itself as a solution. It disguises itself as something that is going to benefit you, that's going to give you power over whatever that is. I think a lot of it through, gosh, now 60 plus podcasts and talking to people. I think a lot of it does come from childhood trauma, from things that just haven't been healed yet in life. Not all childhood stuff, but that can be adult stuff too. But I think typically when we go to a substance or we go to porn or we go to A, B, and C, I mean, people can be workaholics or can just take up their time into something that in their mind they think, hey, this is benefiting me, or it's just a neutral thing, right? Like, hey, it's a vice, but it's not hurting anybody. It's not affecting anybody. But ultimately, whatever this thing is, right? Because I've talked to people that struggle with alcohol. I've talked to people that struggle with like food addictions. Obviously, talked a lot about the porn topic with a lot of people as well, right? And talking about different perspectives on it. But at the end of the day, I think when we will start to realize at some point in our life that that thing is actually starting to pull like our humanity out of us and to turn into something else. Like when you were talking, I was kind of thinking about the image of Gollum, and you get surprised when you find out that he was a hobbit too, because he's basically indistinguishable. He's like his own species almost, but he's still a hobbit. Like that's how he was created. But just to see like what the effect of the ring did upon him, I think about that often when I think about porn, is that you're almost like in this deep, dark cave, almost like Gollum was, and you got these big eyes because, you're adjusting to the fluorescent light,
You're
you're
right. Yeah.
and I almost picture that kind of Gollum illustration. I think like when I was in maybe my worst state or my most like addicted state to where, you're just saying, my precious, where's my precious, right? And that would be, like, throughout the day, it seemed like when I was really pulled into it, it was almost just like I was looking for any excuse to, like, go to the ring and put it on. I could be sad, I could be bored, it could just be a day where I'm not really feeling anything that much, I need some, like, stimulation, I need something interesting. I think, those are the times where I felt like Gollum, where I was, like, looking for my precious, like, where is it? And then once having it, feeling like that almost like, that relief. But then when it's over, when the experience is over, feeling back into my kinda state of being, more or less like a slave to it, which
Yeah, I mean, and the logical, the absolute extreme of that is the fact that even, I mean, this is one of the brilliant things about the movies. I think that whatever we all, we've all gone through the phases of being, oh, the movies are awful, they're not faithful, and then you get older, and then you stop being such trying to turn everything into a crusade, and one of the brilliant things, especially because of just the Peter Jack, it was made by people who love Tolkien, unlike, what we're seeing at the moment in terms of adaptation, right?
yeah.
And they were smart enough and understood that it was worthwhile, that last moment when Gollum gets the ring in Orodruin and bitten Frodo's finger off, and he's floating on the top of the lava. He's holding it and he's smiling as he's being burnt alive. That's how messed up his brain is. He's got his precious back, and he's completely oblivious to the fact that he no longer values his own life. He has become consumed and become a slave to the ring. You know.
Mm.
But the Gollum as a template is just brilliant. Is brilliant.
Yeah, and I've shared this on the podcast before, but just for people that are, new to it, I mean, there was a point in my life where I kinda felt like that, like, I didn't really value my life anymore. I went through a divorce, a little over 3 years ago, and it was kinda, like, leading up to that point where it was about a year before where the D word came out, and it was, like, serious, and I just remembered it was, like, the most depressing day of my life. Like, I called, like, the hotline. I just felt, like, very just I don't think I've ever really had a breakdown in my life, but I think that was a breakdown for sure. But that was the time in my life that I remember where it does feel like that moment of because at the time I relapsed because I was just felt so lost, all that stuff where I think the rings, like, real power was, like, really going after me, right? Like, that was kind of, like, the biggest moment in my life where the Dark Lord was like, "I can grab him for good," right? Like, I can get him. I can get his life, his spirit, his soul. I've got it right where I need it, And then that's the time where God spoke to me and I heard him and I spoke back. And I'll never forget that moment because that moment saved my life. But when I think about it, there are people that don't make that decision, right? Or maybe they keep on living their lives, but there's that thing that is almost kind of slowly killing them inside, slowly turning them into a wraith, so to speak. Because that's how I felt like my progression was going to that point, that crossroads in my life. And that's where it changed. But I think that is the power of this, right? In my mind, I think that is like the sinister nature of porn is that it's very alluring to us. It's not to me anymore, right? Or to us really. But I think when you're at a young age, especially when that's when most I know boys it's between the ages of like 9 to 12 first exposure. Girls it's a little bit after that, but it's getting a lot closer now just with where we're at with culture and technology and all that. But at an early age when that seed is planted, right? It's stuff that I've found out, like I'm 34, that I had to really deal with later in life as I got more mature, as life became more real, that, oh, this is actually like a device of Sauron. This is not a device of God. Like God didn't like make porn, you know, like God created humans. We ended up making it. But with that being said, it kind of ties into where, we were talking about Melkor and Sauron and how they twisted elves, twisted men, twisted creatures. And I think that's in a way like what porn is, where they look beautiful and attractive, but there's something that's twisted with the sexual nature of it. That's twisted with what God I think intended for us to have in secrecy, and privacy, in an intimate way. Now it's a very public thing, and oftentimes it's violent. It doesn't depict. I think it's kind of seen through the eyes of the male, right? And it basically turns people into an object of whoever is watching it.
Yeah, as we said last time, Marsilio Ficino, Objects of Love. It's the template for what love and human interaction ought to look like is the relationship to a certain extent that exists within the Godhead, ultimately, and in a very mysterious way that we'll leave that to one side for now, but also the relationship between God and man. And we are not, as has been described by one of the reformers, we're not tools or toys or instruments in the hand of an angry God. Rather, we are objects of his love. And then in the same way, rhetorically, we are his subjects, but objects of love, and rather than objects of use and abuse through distorted desire. I think that that's present here. And, one of the interesting things it's very cool hearing people talk about Tolkien so much these days. It's especially online, everywhere you look, there is somebody who is really, really reading and thinking and actually creating great stuff and encouraging other people to go on the journey go on a long adventure, an unexpected journey, as it were. But, it can't be stressed enough how important it was that the ring was destroyed in the world, in the Third Age, because in the context of the story and in context of the world, that's the problem. That's the ultimate expression of coercion, of distorted desire, of malice. And as long as it exists in the world, then the threat of it getting completely out of hand is unavoidable. As Christopher Tolkien says this, he says, my father said to me that Sauron, that Galadriel or Gandalf, Sauron feared most of all one of the wise laying hands on the ring. And Gandalf or Galadriel would have been far worse, because they would have been self-righteous and attempted to coerce the world to good. And you one simply can't do that. One cannot force goodness upon other people. But the belief that one is doing so is the kind of exact illusion that exists that people have elsewhere. About the state of life, how they're doing, whether they're doing the right thing, that they're a good person, and so on. But yeah, it's I can't. Yeah, I mean, it's personal experiences. I mean, we spoke about this last time. It's a horrible thing. The first experience of being dragged into knowledge of something that you should not have at so young an age, and thank goodness it isn't absolutely fatal. Thank goodness it isn't the end of the road there. But but it is a rupture. It is a rupture. It is very much like being pulled away from it. But no, I'm yeah. So I've lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry,
No, no,
I'm trying to ignore I'm just trying to ignore something in the other side of the room. Somebody's trying to never mind.
no, you're all good, man. Because I think what I was thinking about it too is it's almost like imagining like a young hobbit, let's just say like Gollum. And I know how he came across the ring was a little bit, yeah, really rough. So it's not like you choked your best friend to get his porno or something. But when I think about it, it does. I do think of like a young hobbit that happens across this ring, right? And it reminds me of that in a way with like porn is you're so impressionable, you have no clue what this thing is. Like you just see a naked woman and you're like, this is great. Like I'm 10 years old and I can like look at naked women all day. Like awesome. I remember I might have said this on another podcast. Not to make light of it, but I do remember at one point in my life, I think as I was probably like in middle school or high school, I was like, man, like one day I'm gonna have like my own job, my own money, my own house. And like I can just like watch like porn whenever I want. Like no one's gonna like,
Yeah.
no one's gonna catch me. Wow, boy, did I find out the hard way, going through a divorce. But I think that does rush through a young guy's mind or girl, whatever, or even at an older age to where you're like, I have access to this like thing. It's almost like a plantier too, is like where you can like a seeing stone, where you have like this knowledge, like you can find. I heard it described once on a podcast. It was really good basically talking about how, this is an unprecedented age of mankind because basically you can look for and pull up like the most beautiful women in the world, right? Like the most sought after woman that in real life, like if you told someone that you were dating them or married to them, like people would be like, whoa, like that's crazy. Like how could that have happened? But now, I mean, you can go online and you can pretty much look up anybody you want to at any time and there's not really much of a restriction there. So I think about it as a way of there's this ring or this powerful thing, right? That was not created with the best intentions. That ultimately is created as a way, I think, for you to consume more of it because it's highly addictive that way. But oftentimes, I think what happens is the seed gets planted at such an impressionable and like early age to where you just don't have any knowledge about it. Even if someone tells you, like I'm sure my parents told me that. Like I grew up in Catholic school, right? So I was taught these things, but yet I still looked at it and I still said, "Hey, I shouldn't have this in my life, but like I want this in my life. Like I want it to be there. Like I want to know where that ring is at all times. That way, if I really need it, which you start to expand the reasons why you need it, the justifications why you need to put on the ring. I think that's similar to with porn is I started to build in justifications in my life to be like, oh, like this is a good time to go into it. Like this is a good time to look at it. This is a good time to use it. All the while, I'm in my soul, I think, becoming more disconnected from God, more disconnected from my creator, who I'm an object of his love. Right. And so I think in that way, it started to affect me and how I saw and treated other people. And not just women, but I just think people in general. I remember I used to have a really short temper, kind of like in a way to kind of bring it back, like with Bilbo and Frodo, where
Yeah.
Bilbo sees them and he goes, "Ah!" And it's just like, "Whoa!" I remember seeing that the first time. I was like, I always love watching Lord of the Rings, like, with people. Like, if I'm, like, dating somebody and they've never seen it before, I'm always, like, so excited for that part. I'm like, "Oh, it's coming. I wanna see how they react to it." Typically, they get pretty freaked out. But, anyways, alright, a little bit
Because
like a tangent there.
terrifying. This is a terrifying scene, and it's genius because there's no precedent for Bilbo. There's no reason. Bilbo's not the bad guy. It's the ultimate sort of jump scare because one, you're not watching a horror movie, and two, that's Bilbo, and he's safe and fine now, right? Isn't that's
Oh,
again, isn't that just the genius? In terms of adaptation, we can look at the fact that that there is so much baked into that just one split second CGI evil face.
which they did
Everybody, because what it does is all of a sudden it means that it's not as simple as not just having the ring anymore. That there is scar tissue here, you know. So all of a sudden the world gets more complicated, but everybody's thinking Bilbo's fine and he's safe, but he still wants it back. And then, I mean, that sets up. We wouldn't be able to understand Gollum subsequently without that, you know, quite so perfectly. Well, we could, but you know what I mean. It assists in that, but that's the thing. Everybody thinks Bilbo's fine now. Oh wait, that's how evil it was.
Yeah, and if we speak about it as a recovery, with a recovery framework on it, that would be like, I mean, I wrote about it, I had a relapse, it was like 7 months ago, and that felt like that Bilbo moment where I was pretty safe from the ring, I felt like, right? And then the ring just there was a shimmer of it where it brought back that scar tissue, right? Like that pull to where you even see, like, his face changes, and it's such a great representation, I think, of even, like, if you're in recovery for a long time, right? And no one there's still gonna be that scar tissue there. There's still always gonna be that connection. It's never gonna go away. And 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 I don't say that to disparage anybody, right? But I say that as a perspective of how you look at life is these things are a part of our life, right? It's always gonna be there. It's always gonna be there that Bilbo had the ring for a certain amount of time, right? Like, that's you can't change that. You can't change that past. But I think what you can change, right, in a way when you think about Bilbo, is he gave up the ring to Gandalf, right? He gave it up and he said, "Hey, I'm going to Rivendell." You know, like I want to see mountains, Gandalf. I remember I love that
Mountains, Gandalf,
mountains,
mountains.
Gandalf.
Can't see
And,
where I can finish my book.
yeah, and then as he's walking out, I think the movie did a really good job of this too. I love this scene. This is one of my favorite scenes. I think is when he's like, "Bilbo, the ring."
The ring, Bilbo, the ring is still in your pocket.
Yeah, and so that part, right? Because Bilbo's like it kinda reminds me and again, we're tying this into recovery, right? So that's what we're gonna be doing as we're talking, but it does remind me of there's been times in my life where I'm like, "Alright, let me go see mountains," kinda like this last trip I went on because it was on this road trip is when I had this relapse. Like, I was gonna go see mountains. Like, I'm ready, but I still had the ring in my pocket.
Right.
It was still there. Like, I was, like, kinda left, and the ring was somewhere in my RV as I was doing my RV adventures. The ring was somewhere there, right? And then that one moment where I was like, "Oh, yeah, I do have the ring." That's where it kinda happens. So and I love the concept of it too, of how the ring's, like, stuck to his hand.
Yeah, yeah. As a
So
yeah.
slowly kind of like I love that about Lord of the Rings too, is that the ring is its own nature in a way, right? It's like the will of Sauron,
Almost sentient. It's almost sentient, right?
which is
Yeah, because it's described that at various points that the ring seeks to work its way into the hands of men or those who are more easily susceptible or corruptible. So it's very strange that all of this agency is poured into it, but it is almost sentient. It's presented as such at times.
yeah, because I think it is I don't know if it's in Galadriel's intro or a part of it, what she's talking about, but basically, like, the ring is trying to be found, and
That's in Well, yeah, and that's in Galadriel's commentary in the Two Towers, I think, when she says the ring now works to find its way into the hands of men who are so easily seduced by its power. You know, the point of the quest now stands on the edge of a knife. And that's really
Does that sound familiar? Kind of does to me.
like,
Like, it's trying to be found, right? I kinda think about it sometimes too, even, like, when you're on the internet, right? Like, I've got software on my, devices that helps me keep some good guardrails up, so that's in some ways some good natural barriers, so to speak, where you're speaking about maybe certain areas of Middle Earth that are safer, they're more, maybe that's just different aspects of your life. It's like when I think of, like, the Shire, I think of Rivendell. Those are, like, parts of my life that are really just the best. Like, you've got, like, the beauty of Rivendell, and then you have, like, the connection, the community, the family, being outside nature when I think about the Shire. And then when you think about these realms of, like, Rohan and Gondor, more of the men, it's a little bit more mixed, right? We got some stuff kinda moving here that there's a little bit more, I think, in a lot of ways, right? They wanted to take the ring initially, to Gondor, and then Gandalf's like, "No." Like, "Let's not do that."
right.
And then Gimli, of course, is like, "Yeah, let's go to Moria, my cousin Balin will give us a warm welcome." And Gandalf's like, I do love it in the books how Gandalf just keeps like, I would not go that way. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not."
I it just being lighthearted. But there are sometimes one of the weakest aspects of Tolkien's writing. I'll say this objectively, as an avowed fan, right?
Right.
He's not very good at writing dialogue. At times, I will say, on my birthday at the end of last year, we read through the Afterbeth and the Tale of Ardenel from which is found in the history of Middle Earth, and it's the conversation about the old hope between Finrod and one of the a Dunedain lady called Andreth, about the old hope and this prophecy of the incarnation or something like it's baked in there, and the whole thing is a dialogue, and it is so weird to read because it's almost like reading a screenplay, and it's brilliant, but elsewhere, as a sort of script editor, I'd be going to Tolkien and saying, this isn't working when you say that Gandalf keeps saying, I would not go that way, and then, without much resistance, goes that way, knowing that they're probably all going to die. It's like, it, doesn't track. The math is not mathing, Mithrandir.
The math is not mathing, Mithrandir. That's funny. But, maybe just going back to Bilbo though, right? In a
Mm.
recovery sense is you think about Bilbo's, like, leaving this world behind. A lot of things are great about it, but there's a transition point in his life, which is really that transition point away from the ring, where he kinda enters into this different realm to where, that part of him, like we said, it showed up, when Frodo showed back up to Rivendell. But there's some kinda transition point where there was something that, forced his hand, so to speak, lack of a kinda to weave it into the whole hand with the ring. But it's almost like having, counsel, like Gandalf, like having that counsel, and I think that's important in recovery too, is like having some kind of mentor, someone that's ahead of you, like Gandalf. He understands the ring, he understands its nature, and he's telling Bilbo to let it go.
So it's interesting to
Well,
consider.
he doesn't understand it yet, I guess, because he
No,
invested.
but I mean, he has enough of a. You can understand that it's necessary. Well, we look at it two ways. It's necessary from a storytelling, from a narrative perspective, so that it's not Wizard did it. That Gandalf doesn't know that it is actually the One Ring. Otherwise, Gandalf is basically complicit in the evil, and he's just watching somebody drive off a cliff. You know what I mean? All those years.
He sees something unnatural with Bilbo.
But at the same time, since, as we remember, but since Gandalf found Sauron's hard drive in Dol Guldur, and that's really what sort of the White Council, that was how they knew that he was back, because of the orc feet picks that he found. That was how they knew that the necromancer was Sauron. It's this, that's canon. That is canon, guys. By the way, um, si- since from that point forwards, Gandalf is on the lookout. But but no, you're right. He doesn't know yet. But it's interesting to consider and reflect upon the fact that Bilbo is planning to leave. Mountains, Gandalf. I want to see mountains. But he also wants to take the ring with him. And he's completely oblivious to the fact. You know what I mean? That he's completely oblivious to the fact. This is one of the extraordinary things about the depth of even just the narrative of the Lord of the Rings, of the trilogy. That by the time you meet Gollum in Moria, and by the time you see Gollum in full flow throughout the Two Towers, and later with the full treachery in the Return of the King, then all of a sudden you know, when you go back and do a reread or turn back in your mind's eye to Bilbo, thinking that he's going to have a happy life, I need a holiday, a long holiday. He's not even aware. He's completely blissfully unaware of what the real problem is. And it's not the Shire. You know?
Oh, that's so
He
good.
wants to leave and he wants to take it with him, and he has to be pressed to leave it behind, you know?
Yeah, and in some ways too, it's interesting because, and I don't know what your take is on this, and again, and I'm kind of figuring out this take as I'm thinking about it, so I'm gonna drop this on you. But in some ways, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like generational trauma, to, in a way, where basically the ring is passed down. Like Gollum has the ring, it's passed down to Bilbo. Bilbo has the ring, it's passed down to Frodo, and not necessarily like, you know, Bilbo was his dad or whatever, because he's not, or that Gollum's related to Bilbo. But in a way, when you think about it, like chronologically, how it works is this affected Gollum, and then the ring found Bilbo, it affected Bilbo, and then it affected Frodo as well, right? So in a way, I kind of think about it similar to porn, where this stuff can be passed down generationally to where it can be passed on to like my generation. And then let's just say I'm blissfully unaware. Like I still bring the ring with me because that's kind of how I felt in a way. Like when I was going into marriage, I kind of felt like Bilbo. I was good. I had my ring, man. I was like, this is the ring right here, right? But I still had that ring somewhere like in my back pocket to where, hey, I'm going on a new adventure. I'm getting married. This is a new
But
stage in
another
life.
ring was made. Yeah.
It was actually kind of cool. It is like it looked like a dwarven ring. It was like gold, but it was like hammered gold.
Mm.
So pretty cool ring. But anyways, but does that kind of track? You know how I kind of think about it maybe as a recovery sense of how I think a lot like when I talk about breaking free, that's kind of what I talk about, right? It's not necessarily like quit porn, all this stuff. It's more like break free from it, like break the chains, like
Right.
drop it in, like it's not like you're trying to quit something because if you have the ring if you have the ring with you, you can't really quit it. Like it's going to be pulling on you all the time. It's more of like how do you break free from that to where hey, that ring, it's still going to have an effect on you. There's still going to be some pull, and it gets better over time, right? It gets better over time. The more buffer you build, and just the more that you're doing in your life, the more you're creating, the more you're leaning into things that are glorifying God, treating people as objects of love, that kind of thing. But I do think that, yeah, like when I did that as Bilbo, it's not like I was just addicted to it all the time. Like there was stretches of time like where I wouldn't even think about it, and that was a lot of days. But then it would come up, and at the time where I wasn't quite as mature prepared for it, like I was just susceptible. Like I just put it on, you know, let's do this. And I think that's in a way what they do a really good job with Frodo too throughout the stories is just its gradual effect on him as well, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's why it has to be destroyed. And I think that there's more to reflect on about this, which is that it's not just that it has to be destroyed. Um, you know, some of these things, of course, people are only familiar with the movies. A lot of the alternative solutions aren't mentioned in at the count that are present in the books and the Council of the Wise at Rivendell. Or we could give it to Tom Bombadil, or we could uh, have it taken across the ocean, or we could hide it somewhere. We could put it in the vault somewhere, and all of these options are not suitable for a variety of. It's not too much that's gone into about why they're not unsuitable, apart from the fact Tom Bombadil would just lose it or whatever, which just deepens the enigma that is Bombadil, right? But the there is a different way of looking at it, I think, or rather reading it, which is to say, there's a difference between saying what's going on in the world versus how we might respond to it as readers, which is, the ring disappeared with Isildur, and when he was shot, and fell into the Anduin after this whole Gladden Fields thing.
We're out of Tolkien.
And then history became legend. Legend became myth, and 2,500 years passed, and the ring went out of all knowledge, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost until when chance came. It instead a new Vera, and it was picked up by the most unlikely creature. Um, so then the whole thing starts again, and then one thinks about that as a kind of generational inheritance, a curse that is placed upon the next generation. And I, I'm I you can see or understand the tension even between, for example, elsewhere throughout the text at various points in time. A figure like Gandalf, certainly when he comes back as Gandalf the White, wrestling against authority, speaking on behalf of the young. And his people who, in physical appearance, men who, like, for example, Theoden, who look in physical appearance to be his contemporaries, of course they're not. He is desperately trying to convince them that that there's more to consider than just, in the case of various parties, dying for valor or having a good death. Because you've got to think about Eowyn, you've got to think about the kids, you've got to think about the next generation. No, we can't just hide this, because you'll get a nice, happy, quiet death, but all people, you don't get to pass the buck. And that is why, one of the reasons why, I think one of the ways that we can look at how do we respond to the fact that it has to be destroyed. Again, we're doing lots of things here at once, but it is a solid reflection that some things cannot be kept safely. And it's really interesting. I was having a conversation with a friend of the family who's about 13 or something, and he's just starting to get into Lord of the Rings and stuff.
Nice.
And which is noise-based, very powerful. And so it's full of questions, and he was saying, why did anybody think for a split second, or even why did Boromir at Rivendell say that it was a good idea that his father should be allowed anywhere near the ring? It's kind of a quite disturbing point when you consider that the man is clearly,
Is it compromised?
let's just say he gets his shoes on prescription from a specialist doctor. There's something going on there. But it's an interesting question. And it's an interesting thing to reflect upon, that throughout the text, and this is one of the reasons why Tolkien's world is so brilliant. It's that the naivety and either the optimism or the pessimism of mankind is present, and you even see that with Morgoth. When we did the read through of the Silmarillion, one of the people who'd never read it before had said, "Why did the Valar just let him out of jail twice? It's like, he's proved that he's the devil. Why did they let him out of prison when he just says, I'm going to be nice now?" Well, that's quite stupid. But of course, this is the first time everything's happened. It's the first time that an angelic power had ever done anything wrong. And they are good, right? They're aligned and possessed of the good themes that are possessed within the mind of Ilúvatar. It's the first time that it's happened. And at the end of the Silmarillion, they make sure that it's not going to happen again until the last day. But no, I mean that's it. Lost, and distortion. It's there, and just repeating for anybody listening in, just announcing breaking news. I've just uncovered a piece of evidence which confirms to us that Gandalf, in fact, found Sauron's hard drive. when he went to investigate Dol Guldur, and that's how he knew that Sauron, the Defiler, had returned. And that, it's amazing, dangerous times we live in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as you're talking too, I wanna get back to the concept of Sauron a little bit because I think in a lot of ways, the comparisons that we're making, or at least that I'm making, kinda talking through this is we all of us as human beings, I think, have that potential to be turned into something that is more of a servant to the darkness than to the light, right? And I think we all have that. There's that opportunity in us, right? This is our human nature. Like there's a pull one way and there's a pull another way. And I think it's really interesting that, when Sauron lost his bodily form, in the Fall of Numenor, that he returned as an eye, not a body, but just a never blinking eye. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, just with your knowledge, like, why did he make him an eye?
Well, I think it's you mentioned something um, when you talk about his demise. How well do you remember the Akalabeth? The story of the downfall of Numenor.
You just go. I'm not gonna do a great job of it.
Um,
But basically, he deceives the men.
right.
He becomes kinda like the high priest, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and he erects on the Menel Tama uh, a huge temple, that's covered in silver almost, and yeah, the tree is, but that's not the important. Everybody knows that bit. But the very last thing that Sauron does, as he's got a body, is very interesting in the in the Akalabeth, and I am so. I'll read, if I may, just
What?
this paragraph from the Akalabeth. Um, Then some few would repent for a season, when came the eagles of the lords of the west, and they cried, "The eagles of Manwë are come upon Numenor," but they fell upon their faces. "The lords of the west have plotted against us," they cried, "and they strike first. The next blow shall be ours." And these words the king spoke himself, but they were devised by Sauron. Um, For Sauron himself was filled with great fear at the wrath of the Valar, and the doom that Eru had laid upon land and sea. And Sauron, hoping only for the death of the Númenóreans and the defeat of their proud king. And at the very last, Sauron, sitting in his black seat in the midst of the temple, had laughed when he heard the trumpets of Ar-Pharazôn sounding for battle. And again he had laughed when he heard of Ar-Pharazôn sounding for battle. And even as he laughed a third time at his own thought, and nothing but his own thought, and thinking what he would now do with the world, being rid of the Edain forever. And he was taken by his own mirth, and consumed by it, and his seat and his temple fell into the abyss. Sauron was not of mortal flesh, and though he was robed now in that shape in which he had wrought so great an evil, he could never again appear fair to the eyes of men. And as he sat there, and as he, forgive me, I've only got one contact lens. He was robed now in a shape in which he had wrought so great an evil that he could never again appear fair to the eyes of men. Yet his spirit arose out of the deep and passed as a shadow and a black wind over the sea, and came back to Middle-earth and to Mordor that was his home. And there he took up again his great ring in Barad-dûr and dwelt there, dark and silent, until he wrought himself a new guise, an image of malice and hatred made visible. And the eye of Sauron, the terrible, few could endure.
Hmm.
Kiss. Chef's
Like,
kiss.
you
I
were
mean, it's the fact that it's just the fact that, as this huge tsunami is consuming Numenor, Sauron's sitting there in full blown goon-brained in a very different way. There's a very kind of different sort of more moral
Yeah, he's
gooning.
gooning off a lot more than just naked people.
Right, in the sense that he's sitting there thinking that, finally, it's almost like, in the old, Looney Tunes when it's Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. And it's that moment when, the coyote's got, thinks he's got the emu, and he's like, "Oh, wonderful." And then he realizes, "Oh, wait, there's nothing underneath me." And then he plunges to his death. And then Sauron's sitting there just laughing at his own thoughts in full blown egotism. And, he's not a stupid character, not a stupid creation. And there's literally like a tidal wave coming in over his head. And he's sitting there thinking, "I am brilliant. How wonderful that is. That's hysterical." And then, the next thing, and I mean, and of course, it causes it be a huge problem for Sauron. I'm sure. I mean, it's the first thing on the Dol Guldur hard drive that Gandalf recovered. The first Google search inquiry was how to be intimate without a physical form. You know, so shot himself in both feet, which he didn't even have to shoot himself in subsequently on that one, right? So,
Mm.
but no, being serious, that's why the eye? I mean, why do you think that? Do you have any thoughts about this? 'Cause there's a lot of it's a contested issue.
Well, I think it was an interesting way that you put it that struck me with, like, the theme, right? And what I talk about is you said something about, basically enjoying that connection without the physical form, which, you can even talk you don't even have to talk about porn. I think you can just talk about society at large on how we've become more, voyeurs, more of the watcher, more of the spectator,
Mm.
with the internet and with social media and with all this stuff is and it's not even like if you're looking at porn, but it's just like if you're on Instagram or whatever and you're just seeing all this amazing stuff, but you're not actually experiencing it, or maybe you're letting it, affect you and how you react in your life. Like, maybe you don't even live a life that you were designed for, but you more of just living out of watching and spectating and thinking, but you're not actually like a physical body maybe doing it. Like, you are, right? But I guess I'm talking more on like the spiritual sense of it and like the soul of there's a soul in a body, but we're actually able to interact with the world and stuff like that. Where Sauron, it's like he's this soul that's like stuck in this giant tower, this quite terrifying tower, and he has dominion over the orcs and all the subjects, but he can't actually get out there and do anything. He has to rely on his subjects to find the ring for him. So I don't know. I guess the way that you put it with the eye, I just think that the ever seeing eye, it's kind of a terrifying concept, just because it reminds me of like when you can't go to sleep, you have a really hard time, and you're just awake and like you're on your phone. Like, I sometimes feel like that's like the worst feeling sometimes, is like it's a late night, and I know it's late for you, but those nights where you just can't fall asleep and you're just on your phone. And those times to me kind of feel like what it would feel like to just be this big eye, is like it's kind of like this aching feeling. Like, you want to close your eyes, you want to go to sleep, you want some rest. But I don't think Sauron ever rests. He's always searching, he's always looking.
Yeah, and I think it's the fact that there's emphasis placed upon it being lidless, which is almost one. I think that, and some people have suggested, and I think that there is some material from in Tolkien's own hand, or at the very least from Christopher's, his sons, that indicates that there was some thought in, or some gesturing towards the fact that even though he took the form of an eye, it wasn't necessarily entirely voluntary. Um, uh, it's a lidless eye. It can't. It can't. Can't. If you don't try holding your eye, your eyelids open for 1600 years. See what happens. Sorry, that was a Jordan Peterson moment. Well, yeah, let's try that. See what happens, Bucko. But
Yeah, you know? Yeah.
gosh, um, you know, you've got to make your beds. Got to go down into the stomach of Uncalagon. You know, gosh, a lot of
Sauron
people.
never made his bed. He's an eye.
It's
He can't
like,
make his bed. He doesn't even have a bed.
what do you mean? What do you mean by fear? Um, uh, you know,
That's
uh, but no, I think that there is some suggestion to the fact that it's an existence of agony,
Mhm.
and here we get into or we sort of approach the thing that sort of governs all of this, which is what it means to have a body. And we discussed this last time, and talking gestures towards this, certainly at the very least in the well, you can glean this from the trilogy, but it's elsewhere discussed that for the sort of the Maya and the angelic powers, there are in Unfinished Tales, there's remarks made about the Maya, the Istari, the wizards, and the fact that only one of them is successful in the quest.
right.
And one of the sort of tentative explanations for that is that having a body is difficult. You know, you're an angelic power, and all of a sudden you think, oh look, we're up here, and we're going to enter into the world of men. And Gandalf Olorin was afraid, and he was afraid of Sauron, he was afraid of the entire business, and yet he was the only one who succeeded. So I think there's something in the fact that there's something that we can certainly say that Tolkien's thinking about body and soul, and the fact that we are incarnate, we're spiritual beings. Well, we are both what Uncle Screwtape would call amphibious, disgusting amphibians, right? But not having a body is, I think, very often presented as being a very painful experience in Tolkien. For example, the ring wraiths, or the Nazgul, the Unari, and Sauron likewise. But entirely right. I mean, there's layers and layers and layers as to how we can look at the eye, but this constant searching and ceaseless watching, it would seem to me that subsequently losing the ring, what else would one become if you became an emoji, as it were, based on your interior state of mind, and you were searching for something, you'd become an eye. But at that point, of course, there's no distinction really. By the time that we get to the Third Age and we're in the story, the beginning of the book of the Fellowship of the Ring, there isn't much difference between Gollum and Sauron psychologically. Both have been made slaves to the ring, really, in as far as in very different ways. That searching for it constantly, this thing that's created. But I mean, there are layers. I don't know if any of this is landing, because it's like we're going up we're surveying the land far and broad this evening, Mac. We are.
Yes, we are, man. Because and hopefully listeners are getting something out of it. I think I am too. I think I'll weave in another recovery topic, with what you're just saying. But I think it's really something interesting, because I think for a while, when I was really hooked on porn and justifying it, I think a lot of the times too, what I hear when I talk to people about it, first reactions is just like, hey, this is like online. I'm not actually like doing it with this person. There's a disconnection, because basically, like you were talking about, it's like the thought that I think we get deceived thinking that we're not in our body, or that we're outside of it when we're connecting on the internet, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like there's that disconnection that's really interesting with the internet, to where, like let's just say there was no internet at all, ever. There would still be, there'd still be prostitution, there'd still be things like that. But I think the difference, and this is something that I talk about when I'm maybe talking to older generations about porn and maybe their experiences, it was more of this tangible thing, right? Like you had to go somewhere and like buy it, or you had to physically have something, right? You had to have like a VHS or a DVD or a magazine, or you'd have to go somewhere. Like you'd have to actually physically do something. Now it's like a 2-second flip your phone open, hit a button, and like you're there. And because it's online, there's not really the tangible in our minds, at least sometimes how we think of it is, it feels like it's not really a tangible thing. It gets out in the ether. Yes, like I'm pleasuring myself to it physically, but outside of that, like I'm not really thinking about, hey, there's actually people involved in this.
Mm.
Right. And like what I found out through a lot of writing that I've done and reading is that a lot of that content is uh, illegal. Like it's either somebody getting raped, it's somebody that's not of age, or it's somebody that didn't consent. So that's why like over 90% of Pornhub got removed because of a huge lawsuit. Because people are basically generating, like user generating, like YouTube, like putting it on there, and there's no verification of, hey, did this person consent to this? So I guess what I'm getting at though is what you were talking about of how it is that agonizing feeling, I think, and that I can relate to that. I think a lot of listeners can relate to that, is that agonizing feeling of like kind of being outside of your body, like kind of being like unplugging from almost your consciousness. Like I almost felt like when I think about when I was falling under the spell of it, I mean, we can make fun of Elijah Wood's faces sometimes, when he's being like, "Ah," like where he's, but I think it does a pretty good job. Like if I had a camera on myself, which is a weird thing to think about, but if I had a camera on myself, like when I was in the act of it, I'm sure I would kind of look like Elijah Wood with my face of, just looking like so almost like you're like agonizing, kind of like that agonizing ecstasy to where it's like this unnatural, like you're getting pulled towards it, but it doesn't like appear to be human. It feels like different, if that makes sense. Like you're kind of under this spell. So I don't know. What do you think about that though? I think the concept of like being outside the body, that's kind of what I can relate to, I think, with the eye. Of like that'd be like the end state. Like let's just say that you just totally give in and you're just like watching it all the time, like all the time. Like your life is consumed by it. I would kind of picture that person as like maybe like Gollum with the big eyes, or you know, with Sauron, just that's like the ultimate stage is you're just watching everything. You're not living in the world.
Right.
You're still eating food, you're still like going to the bathroom, maybe you're still doing a job, but all this stuff, but like let's just take it to that fullest degree, like the full blown addiction part. Like if that's like running your life completely, it almost is like you're becoming like an observer of things.
Yeah, and I mean, the Tolkien, I think, goes certainly in the trilogy, he goes to great lengths to indicate and sort of insist upon the fact that of how disembodied Sauron is, and indeed, even during the flight to the after the flight to the fort, and uh, with Glorfindel carrying Frodo across the Bruinen, then of course reference is made to the fact that they've lost their vestments and they can't move about in the world without the as to the Nazgul. One sees repeatedly that it's almost like the majority of Sauron's most powerful or useful servants or lieutenants are very like him in that they're corporeally incomplete, in that there's just a mouth of Sauron, who likewise, it's like you see that, and it's very difficult to shake the much less exciting in the book, right? But one can't, my master Sauron the Great.
Oh,
These things.
it's just so unnatural.
You believe or remember originally that they were planning to have the mouth open sideways, which never mind, that would have been beyond.
We wouldn't have been ready for that. They're like, "Okay, do you wanna win an Oscar or do you wanna do something really cool?" And
Or
like,
do you or do you wanna get, like, I mean, it's Holy Week, I'm not gonna get it,
just
but,
traumatizing everyone for the rest of their life.
yeah, but so I think that it's stressed that the corporeality thing is present, and even at the end, you see, after the scouring of the Shire, there's this sort of puff of smoke emerge from the body of Saruman after he's been stabbed. you know,
Mm,
and again, you see a fundamental disorder in, there is this question of being incomplete, um, left, right, and center. But I think it tracks. I was just thinking about as you were speaking, about uh, the about the Palantir.
mm,
I think that one of the genius things about Tolkien and his brilliance is that there are other things going on in the world beyond just the ring, and there are other mechanisms and structures of corruption that are present. It's not the case. It isn't the case that if the ring isn't in your possession, then you are not going to be subject to temptation or corruption, or to be capable of being encouraged to be an abominable or an abysmal person. And it's interesting thinking about Denethor and that other back door through the Palantir. And I just double checked because I thought this was the case. It says the Palantir in Middle Earth, they were kept in guarded rooms at high towers. But until the passing of the kings of Gondor, they were not sinister secrets, and their use involved no peril, and no king or other person authorized to survey them would have hesitated to reveal the source of his knowledge of the deeds or opinions of distant rulers, or visions obtained through the stones, right? So there's something likewise in that about the just tracks onto what we're discussing about. Again, Lord of the Rings, I'll state again that Tolkien's Legendarium, the first mover of the entire story is creation and subcreation, and subsequently technology of crafting things, making things, and doing things. But the use of, it says very clearly here, one thinks about the internet, or thinks about the video camera, or anything that we have today. Until the passing of the kings, they were not sinister secrets. Although there's still a king in Gondor, nobody hesitated about saying, "I got my information from the Palantir." But then afterwards, then their use becomes open to misconstruction, and then hundreds, thousands of years later, you end up with Denethor, who is gooning in a different way. By means of using this Palantir to look far and wide, and becomes susceptible to influences that he becomes dependent upon, that are also destroying him at the same time.
And his destroying Gondor.
Yeah,
because he's leading it.
And he honestly believes, and I remember as well. I don't know if we've spoken about this before, but Denethor. I mean, Denethor is Denethor is Denethor gets a lot of a bad rap, and certainly, if people have only seen the movies, then Denethor is a thoroughly unlikable character in Jackson's trilogy. He has more about him to be redeemed in the books, and he's far more sort of elderly and far more having been taken advantage of, grieving for the loss of his wife, and completely at odds, because Gondor is in many respects an expression of what the race of men is at the point of time. The blood of Numenor is all but spent. They're looking for their king, and no king has yet returned. And strength and morality is faint. He's done the best that he can. More. I mean, that's like a good essay question. How good is how is why is Denethor why Denethor be like that? But no, it tracks. I think very much about this idea of the unintended consequences of creation, and also this very strange phenomenon that is remote viewing, which the Palantir facilitate. I mean, the way that Tolkien describes the Palantir, else in Unfinished Tales, or as is presented in Unfinished Tales, is horrifying. It's quite disturbing when the way that they function is described, and it's worse than Orwellian. It's almost as if ultimately that they're conducive for the way that they're used after the fall of after the last king Gondor, after the fall of Gondor. That they're satanic. It's horrifying. Which makes sense. It makes sense to name a company after objects like that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. You're just like, okay, why don't you call it something else? But no, I mean, that's a great tie-in too. Like, that's a whole other discussion right there. So I think we've done a pretty good job of speaking about the ring, Sauron, a lot of background. I think where I want to go with this, and maybe this can kind of be how we conclude the podcast, is the ring was destroyed, right? So I think like talking about it, I think from a recovery sense, right? maybe we could touch on how we got there, how we got to destroy the ring, in the story, how the fellowship was ultimately successful. Because I do think that a lot of that, and that's why I love Lord of the Rings so much. Not just as like the beautiful world that Tolkien created, but I think personally how it relates to me and my story and my life. I love watching Lord of the Rings. I mean, every time I watch it, it's always at a good point in my life. Like, it's always I always kind of remember what was going on because I at least try to watch it once a year. I should do more of that. But whenever I watch it, I'm in a certain type of mood where it speaks to me differently. Like I'm in a different phase of life or something when I see it. And I think it sweetens over time for me. It impacts me more over time. Like every, I think, year I watch it, it like, it just ages so well for me and it impacts me in deeper and deeper ways, right? That are good ways, like that are powerful. That, like we've talked about in this podcast, man, I couldn't do this without you. So thanks again, because I think we surveyed a lot of land in a short amount of time. But that just shows you like how rich Lord of the Rings is that, I mean, there's so much that you can talk about and that you can, it just stems like conversation, right? And ideas. And that's why I think it's interesting having this on my podcast, Porn Free Millennial, where we're weaving this into something that's really important, something that I think a lot of people have to face, myself included, right? So where it is in a way that journey that we see in Lord of the Rings to where we have this thing. And, I would say maybe starting with like when the Fellowship leaves Rivendell. I mean, Frodo's like, yeah, like I don't know where is Mordor, Like where like what are we even how do we destroy this ring? Like I know we need to destroy it. And that's kind of how I felt on early in recovery was like, okay, Dark Lord, I get it. Porn, bad, I get it. But like, why do I want to destroy it? So I think that's an important thing if you're in recovery listening is like, why are we even doing this? Like, why are we even going on this mission to destroy the ring? Like, why are we going on this mission um, to remove this thing from our lives? And then I think also there's people that help you along the way. There's connection. There's the fellowship. And I think that's important too, because each person in the fellowship has their own little offerings that they do and compliments, I think, from different points of maybe maturity, if you were to compare it to like real life, right? Different backgrounds, different perspectives, different skill sets. And I think you learn that along the way. So maybe that's kind of where we can end it and talk more through this. Like our last segment here is just talking through how does the ring get destroyed? And then we can add in, sprinkle in some recovery elements to it, if that works for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's an impossible feat, isn't it? And it's against all odds. It is, as Tolkien coins it, catastrophe. And I'm translating a hardly known 4th century ancient Greek text at the moment on the back burner. And, it's a tragedy. but it's a tragedy just on the cusp of Christianity being a thing. You can see that it's desperately wrestling towards the idea of eucatastrophe, as we've said last time, and I've said elsewhere, and it's been said time and time again in many of Tolkien's letters. It is distinctively Christian, and the eucatastrophic ton. But fundamentally, yes, at every single moment in the journey of the quest of the ring, the journey of the ring, even after the breaking of the fellowship, it hasn't really been broken, even though they're not present with each other. It's something that I always, I say I've always reflected on it. I mean, I think I reflected on it when I got like dumped and all my friends decided that she got them in a divorce. So I was like 17 or something. It was neither here nor there. But it's feeling very sorry for myself. And then they all came back like 3 years later or something. And so I was reflecting on that when I was very down in the mouth. But you can see that they're still fulfilling and offering their gifts and their talents, even when the fellowship is breaking. I think that the wise looking at the breaking of the fellowship, at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, realize that it hasn't broken. They're just not in each other's company. It's a very black-pilled thing to say that just because you're not physically present with somebody that your fellowship or your communion or your community is over. And when I think about the most unique kind of community of all, I think of the body of Christ, and there is nothing after we're baptized that will ever separate us from each other. Certainly not until the day of judgment. Put it that way. So I think that the community, absolutely, fellowship in the purest expression, that endures against all odds. I mean, why did the ring get destroyed? I mean, above my pay grades, but how do we apply that to? I think we've hit on the point that the particular takeaway point for this conversation, which is that Frodo wouldn't have been able to do it without Sam. As I said.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think about this too, right? Because there's a lot of times where I was kind of like Frodo on the boat, when the fellowship's, physically breaking. And Frodo basically is like, he's just going to go on his own. Like, he's like, I'm going to go destroy this thing. Right.
Right.
And I think if you did like an alternate story plot of just Frodo going by himself.
Well, he'd be dead. Gollum would have killed him in his sleep, like on day one, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think, and this is like a recovery takeaway, but I think a lot, my journeys changed when I started to be with my Sam, who's my little brother, right? I mean, we've been in recovery together for more than 3 years. We check in with each other every day on how our recovery is going, and my little brother's my Sam, and I think I'm his Sam, to where we're always gonna be together, like, and support each other. And sometimes we're gonna share the load. We're gonna share the load with each other. But, there's there's one point where, Sam carries Frodo, which
Yes.
is one of the best, I'd say, moments in the whole trilogy, in the books, and it's him, taking Frodo up and carrying him because Frodo just couldn't do it anymore, and I've been Frodo many times in my life to where I need Sam to help pick me up and carry me because I'm like, I don't know where to go. Like, I don't know how to go forward from here. And I think that happens a lot of time with kind of any addiction or just vice or just conflict in your life. It doesn't even have to be that. There can be just something there where you're just like, I'm exhausted and I don't know how I can go forward. And I think that's why it's so important to have like a Sam in your life, somebody that can help pick you up when you need it. And I think there's a humility to that. I think that Frodo learns over time is that he needs Sam. Like, and I don't know in the books, like if it's like that as much, but I think they do a good job in the movies portraying that in a way to where, he's like, go home, Sam. He's like, go home, and, Sam ends up coming back and, saving Frodo from Shelob. But I think, that's one thing I really want to hit home, right? Because you answered it perfectly to where, like, how do you remove porn from your life? I mean, it is above my pay grade. I can talk about, strategies. I can talk about, hey, we're going to go through, drop it in Mount Doom this way. Like, that's how I'm going in my life. That's how I'm dropping the ring into Mount Doom. But I think for people, it looks a little bit different. But I think the skeleton of it, right? The fellowship aspect of it, I think is like a crucial element because I don't think there's some people that are kind of like Tom Bombadil, I think, that are just kind of like, like this has never affected me. Like, I don't have any, like, draw to it. But I think when you think of, like, the human, psyche, how we're built, I think most of us are there's a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of and especially when it happens at a young age, like, you're drawn in. You're drawn into it. You're not Tom Bombadil. I think I thought I was Tom Bombadil. I'm like, "Oh, yeah. I just quit it by myself. I'm fine."
Yeah, the interesting thing is though that again a remark is made about somewhere that the Tom Bombadil the Tom Bombadil being Tom Bombadil. I think even Gandalf makes a remark about this. Is we're not going to get into it right now, but all of the sort of Tom Bombadil-ology, but there is a remark made somewhere, and I couldn't put my finger on it right away, that even Tom Bombadil's nonplusness and sort of like non-interventionism, it's all cool here, man. It is fundamentally short-sighted.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
what would happen when Sauron eventually got the ring? And the entirety of the old forest were completely ripped down and burned. Similarly, as we're saying, there are tensions there are generational tensions at play and they don't track literally in as far as, remember that Bilbo's Frodo's like 50 or so. He's in his 50s when when he sets out from the Shire with the ring, ultimately. But he's still, there are generational tensions between those who are established and those who are sort of younger and coming up in the world. And you see that left, right, and center. And you can say that Bombadil's, being Tom Bombadil is basically a synonym for boomerism. I don't worry, I've got Goldberry. I'm keeping old man Willow under control. Fair river daughter, she disappears and then comes back, and I've got my boots and my jacket, and I've got a simple life, and I don't get involved in all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, you're going to have to be eventually, and that's the same thing. So there are two. That's a brilliant sort of extra string that to the bow that you've added there, because it's one thing to talk about the individual issue that people might have with particular besetting sins, as we call them, whether it's pornography or lust or drugs or alcohol, whatever it might be. And then there are those people who say, well, I don't have those problems, and therefore they don't take too much of an interest in them. And what we're actually seeing at the moment is the beginning of the Tom Bomber pill is wearing off. A lot of people are sitting around and realizing, oh wait, it doesn't matter whether I have these vices or struggle with these issues or not, because I am living in a world in which I have a responsibility to seek that people do not engage with these things, and that instead they are more conformed closely to the path that God has ordained for his creation and all of the creatures therein. And people are looking around and talking about OnlyFans. I see just down in the comments, Ryan's mentioned, OnlyFans. This is the logical consequence of human trafficking, OnlyFans, mass drug deaths, strain on the healthcare system, taxes going up. I mean, none of these matter as much as the value of a human life, but nobody gets to say anymore, I'll just be off like Tom Bombadil in my forest. So you might as well get on board now and start thinking about joining the fellowship, as it were, because you can't get away from it. You'll sooner or later, the only thing that you have control over, to not quite the Gandalf quote, the only thing you have control over is how soon, how soon you're going to be affected or take responsibility for your role and place in, quote unquote, the fellowship, which is the community of, I'll say, all believers, just for the sake of not saying something that I would then have to spend another 15 minutes glossing, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, how many houses do you want to have burnt down before you become a firefighter? You see the fire and it's like, well, it's not my house. How close does it have to get to your house before you become a firefighter? And being very cynical when I say that, but I think that there's another string to the bow to add there. Community.
Yeah, and I think too, just thinking outside of ourselves, because I mean, I could use the same analogy of like the fire is like almost kind of like you don't believe that your house is on fire. Like I don't think my house is on fire, and I'm addicted to porn, but it is on fire, and it's right next to my wife at the time's house. Like we're not same house. She's in my house now. Like we're in our same house, and this house has like a giant fire in it, and I'm the one saying, "Yeah, it's fine. Like it's just my thing. Don't worry about it." But we're joined now.
Like Bilbo trying to leave with the ring still in his pocket and thinking that he's going to have, that he's going to, leave and everything will be fine. And he doesn't realize that he's actually taking the thing that's made him so unhappy with him.
Yeah. And then I think we think about it too, just with, not just you or like if you're married, like your wife, but then also everyone attached to it. And again, I'm talking about this in a relational way, right? I'm talking about this from personal experience. And I think I speak for a lot of people to where it's not just within you, it's also going to affect the people that you're with and that's around you, that circle, right? Because it wasn't just like this happened and that's it. Like, there's people attached to that. Like, if a relationship ends, right? Like, when my marriage ended, it was a big deal. Like, it was like, I remember having to talk to my friends and just seeing the tears come up in their eyes, just telling them this heartbreaking thing and talking to family. All those things. That's why a big reason why I talk about this, and this is a big reason why I talk, where we're talking, is because I'm trying to paint that picture of, that can happen. It might not seem like it would happen now, but it can happen to you. It can happen to the best of us. Even the elves, even the Numenorians, right? The best of us can there can be that corruption in our life to where what you think is giving you the most power is actually um it's sucking the power out of you and twisting you into what maybe could be the best form of who God intended you to be. There's a similar force that's trying to pull that away from you and trying to consume it and suck it in. And I think that's a big part of that consuming eye. And I think that's like the warning in a lot of ways is if we don't destroy the ring, I mean, we could become a slave to it.
Yeah, the I reminded no, there's no better warning than the words of Frodo. Really, uh, when they've got past through a dune, after the Kirith Ungol incident, and they're getting very close to to Orodruin, to Mount Doom, and and Frodo says, "Oh, I can no longer recall the taste of food, or
Yeah.
the sound of water, or the feel of the breeze." And there are many things in our lives that, again, I'm obviously just for everybody listening in, we're very clearly, Tolkien wasn't the Lord of the Rings is not an allegory for, an allegory against against indecent digitally recorded material, right? um, we've been lighthearted in our remarks to this, but we were also saying, look, very often I write about what's going on from the in-world perspective of Tolkien, but it's also important sometimes that we talk about our experiences as readers. And many people, as we were saying earlier, when you read those words, I can no longer recall the taste of bread or the sound of water. I know, yeah, I think of when I was so depressed that I was a risk to myself.
Yeah.
Like, whenever I read, I can no longer recall the taste of bread or the sound of water or the feel of the wind. I think of that, and doesn't surprise me if, certainly in the context of the whole Porn Free Millennial project, that other guys would immediately track that uh, those words of Frodo onto their own lives in a split second for other reasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, that rock bottom, but you could call it maybe Mount Dune bottom.
Yeah,
Just, 'cause, it was interesting. One of the recovery guys, I'm in this weekly group and just great discussions, but this guy brought up a point that his wife brought up about, like, I think she struggled with alcohol, and she said something about, like, rock bottom's not maybe actually the point, like, where you're drunk and you're doing all this, but it's, like, that point after to where you realize, all the pain that you've caused yourself and to others. Like, that's a rock bottom moment to where, like you're talking about, I felt this very similar way to where just there was no color in the world anymore. And you forget about just all these amazing things that have happened in your life and all the people that you love, and you're not thinking about the love that Christ has for you, right? And that's like the moment where you're disconnected, you're lost, you're isolated, you're feeling like fully kind of consumed, right? To where the essence of like the soul and the perception of the world is just so drastically changed and almost like opaque to where that depression hits, and it's just like nothing just brings you joy, like nothing, like just everything just is like negative and like just like there's no end to it. There's like no light.
yeah,
And I think that's kind of interesting. I guess I'm thinking about it as I'm thinking about the movie in my mind, but I mean, think about though, like how the ending happens, right? like the Eagles come, and they rescue them, they bring them back to Rivendell. Like, that's amazing because I think in some ways when we're destroying this ring, it's not. And again, I think the ring in a way represents, it's not evil itself because there's still sin in the world after the ring is destroyed, from my understanding. Like, it's not like it's just this utopia. There's still sin. It's just the ring itself, in my mind, kind of reminds me of like, what is that biggest, most tempting sin in your life? That kind of reminds me of like what the ring is, because
Machine.
there's
It's
just
the most magical thing of all, which is
yeah.
the desire to, and Tolkien says this very clearly. The ring is the machine. Right? The ring is the machine and magic, as Tolkien says very famously, are indistinguishable, and the machine represents as magic does in our world, and the machine does in 20th century, the attempt to actualize and enforce our desires or wishes as individuals upon creation, very often while minimizing the consequences. So it's a very unique usage of the term machine, but fundamentally one could say that it is almost like the nuclear weapon um, of it is the thing that enriches or enhances your ability to do evil, which you could do otherwise 10 times, 10 times, 100 times, 100 times ad infinitum. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think about it too, as you were describing, like Galadriel or Gandalf, if they have the ring, how destructive they'd be. So it's such a beautiful way of putting it, and like how Tolkien explains it, because it resonates with me. Because I look back, like if I looked at my life and like the worst things that I ever did in my life, I look back of that relationship I had with that ring, and that's how it used me. Like you were saying, in a way of that's like the greatest mechanism for evil that you can do in your life is whatever that ring is uh filling you up with to do ultimately.
Yes. Yes.
Because
And
Sauron's basically like domination. Like he just wants to dominate everybody.
yeah, I mean, there is a question there. And I'm not trying to.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pitch a new
Opinion.
like Netflix show where it's like, um, where it's like, oh, Sauron the well. I mean, there is that show already exists. It's called The Rings of Power. And
Exactly.
but but no, I mean, quite literally, ultimately, the if you have, I mean, to settle the expression, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And you see, and you can even in another way, you can see outside of the ring in the Silmarillion with the kinslaying that takes place at Aquilonde, and of the sundering of the elves and the oath of Feanor, and then later in this penultimate chapter of the Silmarillion, the last and most evil of the slayings of elf by elfers is described at Brythonbar in near Arvenian in by Beleriand. All of this again goes back to uh, beauty, sin, the custody of the eyes, the custody of the heart. The oath of the Noldor binds people. The oath of Fëanor and his sons quite literally draws people. It's oaths, as we've said before. I think it was in one of our first conversations like 2 years ago. Oaths are like magic in Tolkien. They are almost like the demons that whisper in people's ears. And you see throughout when the oath is invoked, people get various people who get drawn into it, and they they don't come out alive. The Michael and Maedhros, the two brothers who lay their hands upon the two Silmarils that remain, the other one being in the sky. One of them commits suicide, and the other one is swallowed up into the earth. And that's the weight of the oath. And there are other sources and mechanisms of evil in Tolkien's world, and it's important not to focus solely and simply on the ring, because,
Right.
hence the word Morgoth's ring. Before there was Sauron's ring, there was Morgoth's ring, which is the whole of, to a certain extent, Morgoth bound all of creation to himself in the same way that Sauron bound himself to the ring. So the discord, the theme of discord that Melkor created still exists, right? And until the music will be played aright, and creation 2.0. So similarly with us, this is a point of keen reflection that our paths through life are never going to be untroubled. The rings for us to destroy or to quest to destroy are not significant on the cosmic level, but we are significant on the cosmic level beyond all logic and reason, because we were loved into being and created by the exercise of the loving kindness and reason of our Creator, by God, who then chose to redeem his creation from within, and we are made in his image. So again, it's a reminder that we actually are bigger than the rings in our lives that we carry. The rings that we're trying to destroy mean slim to nothing. They only mean something in as far as they can destroy something that really does matter, which is the ring bearer, which is us. Realize that you're bigger than whatever thing that you're struggling with. You're bigger than, your OnlyFans issue, or you're bigger than your problem with weed. That's tiny. We're made in the image of God.
Right. Yeah, we have significant power and light within us. And I think that's something that Gandalf shows the Fellowship too, and shows the men, the what power they have. I think that's something maybe, I think we're coming to a close here, but that I just can't stop thinking about, the quote with Gandalf's, what to do with the time that's given to you. Where one thing I love about Gandalf throughout, the trilogy and just everything is that he helps like show people like the power within them and like their potential and encourages them, and guides them and leads them. And that's another thing, right? Like we have the fellowship, and I think Gandalf, I think that's a thing to think about in your life as well, as like having your Sam, having your fellowship with you, but also having somebody that's a little bit ahead of you, that can help guide you and show you the power that's within you, right? And I think ultimately, right, like it's going to church to read in the Bible. That's that. But also, I think on the recovery level, having someone there like mine, he's a pastor. He has a podcast. Vern Tomke, Finding Traction. I'd say he's like one of my Gandalf in my life, to where he's helped remind me of like, hey, you're bigger than this. Like you're saying, like you're bigger than the ring. Like it, it's it's um it's a blip if you choose it to be in your life. Like when you choose to go the other path, like it will become something that in kind of like how Galadriel talks about at the beginning, just like a whisper almost. Like that's where Sauron's power, he kind of goes into the wind. I mean, that's how I think about porn a lot of times in my life throughout my days. It's just like a small little whisper that I'm like, what? Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. It gets there, but I think that initial battle, if it's the first time really getting into recovery and really thinking about this differently, it does feel like, oh my gosh, we're going to Mount Doom. Holy crap. That's how it feels like, I think, for a lot of people when they start really thinking about their lives differently, or maybe the full scale of it is like, okay, like I really have to go on this quest in my life, which will, it will tear you down. It will beat you up. It'll just strip you laid bare. That's how I felt, at least. But, what's on the other side of that is the Shire, and it's a world where there's still going to be troubles. There's still going to be challenges. There's still going to be sin. But I think you don't have this giant Mount Doom in the background looking at you. It's more manageable because you still have to destroy rings, like you said, and you still have to battle this stuff. But I do think when you conquer that first really big ring in your life, the other rings or the other Saurons, they look a lot less. You know what their power can be. Like that they could destroy you, but at the same time, you know that you can destroy them.
Right. And yeah. And you know, even the mightiest are destroyed by their own search history, including Sauron and Morgoth, bringing us full circle.
Bringing us full like a ring.
Yeah, quite. Um, no, it's no, yeah, I can't put it better than you on that. I think you've had it spot on.
So we're at 2 hours. It's been a really great conversation, Will. I think the time's flown by like an eagle. Um, we could get that's always the best joke where people are like, why did the Eagles drop the ring, and and you're just like, shut up. But it's
Right.
kind of funny. But what did want to say is I just want to thank you again. Will's across the pond, so it's late. So I appreciate your time tonight, man. And I think the listeners, if you're on still, like, thank you. And I think hopefully you got something out of this exploration that we did. I sure know I took down a lot of notes here. And basically, what I'll do is have the key takeaways in the episode description. Might do some slight edits to get this out in the full sense of the video. But we'll have it up on Substack. We'll have it up on YouTube. We'll have it up on Apple, Spotify. We'll put it on X too. And make sure to, if you're on Substack, right, and you're listening to this, subscribe to Will's Substack Palinode. And if you're on X, follow Will at X. It's just Will and your last name, correct? Anselm on X. And then, Will, anything else? Any remarks on just where people can find you or what you're working on? All that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this week I'm just waiting for a book. My book is waiting to this book, my new edition, which I've put together with introduction and commentary, an commented edition, an annotated edition with comment. Gosh, it's late. And normally I'm wide awake at this time. A new book of mine, which I edited and produced commentary for, The Moral Universe by Fulton Sheen, is about to drop any day now. I'm just waiting for that to be approved.
Okay.
And once it's approved, then it'll be available for purchasing in Amazon and a couple of other places.
Okay.
It's so that's look out for that. Apart from that, everything that Mac said to me back to Mac. I'm sorry, I'm shutting down now. I'm winding down ever so slightly, which is really unusual because it's nighttime. I'm awake normally, but uh, no, nothing comes to mind. No, and yeah, if anybody's listening in, you'll probably get it better second time round because there'll be some of my rambling cut out, my tired.
No, just you. I think the internet disconnected very briefly. So that was basically me rambling a little bit there.
Rambled quite a bit this evening, and I've been, but I have because I am tired, actually unusually tired. So
this is kind of like the Ramble podcast. I think I like to ramble. Ramble's fine. Ramble's good. It's just like having a conversation with somebody, right? Just sitting on the couch, talking about things. That's the goal, at least. But with that being said, yeah. So what we'll do too, Will, is once we do get that link, let's just say someone's listening to this podcast 2 months later, we'll make sure to have that in the episode description too, of just where to buy the book. And I think that's phenomenal. I listened to a lot of Fulton Sheen over the summer, really connected with him, and he's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. Like just the way that he expresses himself and the Lord's word is phenomenal. And I know we've done this before, but whenever I have like a Christian person on with me, I like to end with a prayer. So maybe we could do the Lord's Prayer on finishing this up and then close it out.
of course,
You want to lead us?
I did last time. I don't want to do all the legwork here, Mac. Take care.
All right. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, just thank you for Will. Thank you for everyone listening tonight, everyone that will listen in the future, and just speaking through us tonight. And just I just wanted to say prayers to the praise of fellowship, of having fellowship in our lives with other people, with beautiful creations of yours, and seeing the light in them, spreading light to others. It's just one of the most beautiful parts of life that you've created, Lord, is the ability to see that light and to experience it, to feel that love. So we're going to say the Lord's Prayer in your name. So, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. All right, all. Amen. Have a wonderful rest of your evening or your morning, your afternoon, wherever you are. Will's kind of in the darkness, but it is technically the morning. So he's kind of in both worlds right now. Everyone, thanks for being on tonight.
Thanks so much, Mac. Pucks. Bye.
Bye, guys.